Hey there, race fans. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Inside Line. It's not May, but it certainly has felt like it the last couple days as we watched 2 full days of open testing at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in preparation for the 109th running of the Indianapolis 500. Weather cooperated with us perfectly. Internet, on the other hand, not so much, but we'll get into that in a second. We're here to recap everything that took place these last couple days on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in preparation for the 500 on this episode of the Inside Line. Joining me is my co-host, as always, Joey Barnes. Joey, what were some of your opening thoughts on what we saw from testing? Any big takeaways? Certainly was happy to feel like we were finally starting to transition into the month of May after a couple slow-ish months to the start of the IndyCar season.
Yeah, it finally feels like it's happening. We're finally starting to get into the thralls of the season a little bit, because after this we go to Barber and then we go back to the Speedway for the road course and then the oval and then Detroit. Like, we're finally starting to build into a grind a little bit, hopefully. And the impressions from the test are it's a mixed bag on a lot of levels, but I think that the chief takeaway is, man, the Ganassi cars are quick. They look like, to me, and again, it's testing, so you got to take everything with a grain of salt, and you don't know who's sandbagging and who's not. Not that anyone sandbags in racing, but Ganassi could follow. Like, they could follow really closely and really well. It's kind of fascinating to see, just honestly, the amount of confidence that they immediately came out of the gate with. I mean, you look at Alex Palou coming out, running at one point the fewest amount of laps for anybody that didn't crash on day two. And but you look at that speed that they were able to extract, and it's just like they were in their own little world, doing their own little thing. And then you look at Dixon leading on day one with a pace of 225 1A2, and it's just, everything just looked business as usual, just routine. And let's be fair to everybody. I mean, everybody's working through their own programs. You don't know if they've got different downforce setups. They didn't want to necessarily follow closely. We had boost turned up on day two. We had all these interesting things that were in development, and as you do with tests. But I was really taken aback by Ganassi's strength. It filtered over to the Ganassi affiliated cars at Meyer Shank and Felix Rosenquist and Marcus Armstrong. And honestly, I think that was probably a healthy surprise too. Is people have been wondering how is Christian Lundgaard gonna do at McLaren on an oval, just because of what he did at RLL. And I think that even though he was with Ganassi last year, I think people kind of overlook Marcus Armstrong a little bit. And in a Ganassi affiliated program, technically still a Ganassi driver, that's been loaned out more or less. He looked pretty good yesterday and the day before. So that's the immediate thing that stands out to me, quite honestly.
Yeah, outside of Joseph Newgarden's Indy, back-to-back Indy 500 win last year and the way it happened on the last lap, and everything that went into those final, say, 20 laps or so last year, one of my biggest memories or biggest takeaways, I feel like, was just how much more, how dominant, frankly, Chevy was compared to Honda. I mean, you saw it in, if memory serves me right, Chevy had a complete lockout of the Fast Six last year. Team Penske locked out the front row, and then I think that second row was Alexander Rossi, Kyle Larson, and Santino Ferrucci. So you saw it in qualifying. You really saw it in how the race panned out. Joseph Newgarden was in a league of his own and was, had more speed than Pato could fend for. Alexander Rossi was right up there. Scott Dixon was a little bit, but I don't feel like we ever really got a sense that Dixon was going to be able to truly fight for the win. Once we got into those final 20 laps, he was kind of sitting around there in that third or fourth range and was never really able to work his way up into one of those pivotal top two spots. Alex Palou was, there or thereabouts in the top, 5 to 10, but again, never truly felt like a threat. And certainly those cars had a little bit of work cut out for them when we started the race and in terms of where they started. So I felt like really for the first, I'd say, day and a half or so of testing, Honda felt like they had dominated the timing charts. And again, as you mentioned, we don't want to dive too much into or take too much away from testing times, which in the grand scheme of things are 2 additional days of practice, and we're not making grand pronouncements off of, say, Tuesday or Wednesday of the first week of month of May action at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in other years. But it certainly didn't feel like at this point a year ago where I think we kind of already had some breadcrumbs of, is Honda missing a little something here? And that certainly turned out to be the case. Once we got to the month of May, things felt a little bit more even. Chevy turned in some solid laps over the last maybe hour or so of testing on Thursday to where it felt like things were a little more even, and we can dive into that a little bit more. But let's go back maybe to Wednesday, day one of testing. I know I mentioned earlier, and a lot of you probably know, we had a 2-hour and 45-minute delay to get things going. We're supposed to kick things off, I believe, at 10 a.m. on Wednesday with a 2-hour program for veterans who did not have to go through the veteran refresher program. And then we're supposed to move into ROP and then finish the day with a 3-hour program for the entire field. Obviously not the case. I didn't get a straight answer on exactly what happened, but as best I can tell, there were everything from radio communication issues to technological, maybe internet induced issues in terms of timing and scoring communication from teams and series officials, communication to drivers. It was just almost felt like a technological blackout, is maybe the best way to describe it. And it took a long time, certainly a lot longer than the 20 to 25 minutes that it took at Thermal when the TV broadcast blacked out last month, even though for the most part, I think timing and scoring still was working okay. I think there were some teams that mentioned that day that they had some issues there, but this was turned out to be a pretty big issue. Never got a straight answer on the, if there was one true culprit. Certainly seems troubling that technology stuff, again, this wasn't a Fox, Fox broadcast. This wasn't on Fox's cable channels. But this is still, IMSP, which of course Penske Entertainment owns. IMSP does a lot of the behind the scenes technological work for these Fox broadcasts. And so that was the same, equipment, a lot of the same personnel that we were using for these YouTube testing broadcasts that we saw on Wednesday and Thursday. So certainly you would much rather have that happen in a testing scenario than once we get to May, when we have practices airing on cable for 6 hours a day. We got that schedule, I believe, yesterday. Really promising schedule, as long as things technologically go according to plan. But certainly if you're Penske Entertainment and Fox folks, you don't want to continue seeing things like this crop up. And there's got to be some nerves as we enter the month of May that these bugs still are not totally worked out, despite the months and months that folks took into the off season getting everything set up, and really the month and a half or so since this season kicked off, that folks have been tinkering with things, I'm sure, around the clock, behind the scenes, every single time something goes wrong. So we'll see if those continue to persist once we get into next month, when cars are on track starting on Tuesday, May 13th. But that was not on my bingo card, certainly, as we were rolling into the parking lot to get things ready on Wednesday morning.
Yeah, I don't know how something like this just happens, though. And I think that's the gripe, right? This isn't, in some ways, I love to use the word technological blackout. I mean, in some ways, you could kind of look at it like a rain delay, because If it was raining like it typically does during testing, then we're off for 3 hours, and nobody bats an eye about that. But this could have been prevented, right? This is another thing, whether the situation was rushed or whether they're just, somebody didn't flip the right switch, whatever it was, because like you said, you're not getting a straight answer on that, and that's not too surprising. It just, for whatever reason, thermal, something just feels half-assed. Just in the simplest way to say it just these things simply should not happen. Yeah, it's nice that it happened at a test, but this is valuable running that was missed. These are simple things, relatively speaking. These are things that we shouldn't. Maybe we were spoiled with everything kind of being like good for so many years, and not in terms of like just business as usual. Come in, you set up, you do it right. Just I don't know. Just maybe everyone's rushed. Maybe they're stretched thin. Maybe it was just simple with somebody forgot to lay the correct cord and plug it into the correct source. But just these things should not be happening. But yeah,
if I had to make an educated guess on the kind of the culprit of all of this, I'm continue to think that these new production trucks that Penske Entertainment and IMSP brought online at the request of Fox, and really a collaboration between the two parties in ideally lifting the level of production quality and capabilities for both sides throughout this broadcast relationship. I get the sense that that's probably what a lot of this has to do. They're still working out bugs, and I mean, I'm sure you can try to do some of this stuff in the off season, but I mean, we've seen, as we saw through the off season, I mean, there were a lot of this stuff was seemingly, even though no one would readily admit it, things were just kind of behind. This deal got announced in June, which seems like a lot of time to work with, but if memory serves me right, I think ABC had announced that they were leaving back in, before, say, even the 2018 season had started, and that NBC would be taking over things full time even before that last season that ABC was going to be calling the first couple races of the year kicked off. And NBC had already been calling races for years, so there wasn't really anything for them to learn or change or do differently. They were just taking on more responsibility. This is new personnel, several of which have never covered or worked in racing before, some who have. New technology that's coming online, and we saw everything from the booth not getting announced until less than 2 months before the year started. There were folks on the IMSP, the production side, that were signing contracts or agreeing to deals with weeks or days before the season was kicking off. You had the pit reporters getting announced like Tuesday or Wednesday of St. Pete race week. Like, a lot of these things have felt like they were just a little behind, I think, where you would ideally want them to be. And it leads me to believe that the proper work on these production trucks, where all of this technology happens and is housed out of, was probably kind of done. And frankly, in the same manner, it's unfortunate. You hope that these things stop here and we stop talking about timing and scoring issues and broadcast issues and weird delays or glitches on the broadcast that we've seen from time to time on the timing chart on the left side of the broadcast. Those, I felt like, slowed down a little bit at Long Beach and weren't as noticeable as they were at St. Pete and Thermal. But it's become that thing that you hate to continue to talk about, but it kind of lingers in the back of your mind, and you hope that we don't see that for the month of May, and God forbid for the 500 once we get to May 25th. Moving on to the actual racing that we did see once we got things rolling on what became Wednesday afternoon. They did extend for an hour. I think, if I'm doing the math in my head, what I think we were supposed to have 8 hours of running, and we ended up getting like 6 hours and 15 minutes. So we lost close to 2 hours of action. But it wasn't like it was a complete dud of a day. And there were a lot of drivers that told me once we got through the end of yesterday, Thursday, through our second day of testing, that they'd gotten through all of their test sheets. So I do feel like, more than likely, maybe we just, everything got a little condensed and folks just had less time where they weren't running, hopefully. And maybe we kind of just saw more jam-packed days. Ultimately, teams are limited by the number of tires that they get, and this tire allotment that they get for the month of May kicked off with this open test. So teams were starting to chew through those a little bit. And whenever we get rain out days, it just oftentimes means, especially if it's only one or part of a day, it seems like we just kind of get more condensed, action-packed running, and teams ideally, unless we have years like last year where we had a bunch of rain, we don't see too much, teams just frankly not getting through everything they needed to run through. But once we got into, say, that first hour and 15-minute session or so when those veterans were on track, and then that last 3-hour session when everyone was able to get out there, all 34 cars, what were some takeaways that you noticed initially right as we kicked things off, maybe beyond the strength, the resurgent strength of those Ganassi cars on Wednesday?
Yeah, I love that you touched on Honda, because I do think that was certainly, when you look at practice 3, which is effectively, I'm not looking at the no-tow list for Wednesday, because we don't care about the no-tow list without the boost and whatnot for qualifying. But, I look at this, and with the exception of Joseph being in P2, they've got 9 of the top 10 spots, and then you got Larson on 11th. It's things like that really kind of stand out, logging almost 3,000 laps across the field just on practice 3. But, it's fascinating to see, really just, it's not, even though we talked about Ganassi, Honda looks good across the board. Like, the Andretti cars look good. RLL had a little bit of a flash of pace with Takuma there in P3, which is not too much of a surprise. And we'll get more into RLL here in a bit. But I think, honestly, probably the rookies not necessarily being, Louis Foster showed some flashes. Jacob Abel showed a little bit. Certainly for the wrong reasons on day 2 at Dale Coyne as a whole. But I think that when I look at this, it's Brian Reinbold not getting much running, with Jack Harvey having an issue, Santino having the engine issue that he did, and having to get a new engine on that day. And so I guess I'm kind of curious where things are with Chevy. We know last year they had the plenum event during qualifying running. They're coming back. Honda looks like they had maybe found something. Is Chevy pushing? And that's where we're seeing some of these issues. I know before we got on here to talk, you mentioned it was a hybrid issue, I think, with Jack.
Mm-hmm.
And you hate to see it, but you also know they're going to happen, right? It's a team that's only doing a one-off at Indy. They're going to have a lot of teething issues. So those are some things that really stood out to me. Was I kind of, not saying that I expected a ton out of the gate from rookies. It looked like business as usual for Kyle Larson, but overall, I think those are some of the things I'm very curious to see when we get back here. And I feel like that kind of theme continued into day 2 to some extent. I'm really interested to see where the engine package is at for both, because, as you said, Chevy's had kind of everybody's number the last couple of years, and it looks like maybe things have shifted a little bit. And it's very curious where things are headed. But Kyle Kirkwood looked strong. Marco Andretti looked strong. Elio looked like he hadn't missed a beat, and that's not a surprise. Elio looked exceptionally strong, I think, over the 2 days. I think next to Alex Palou and Scott Dixon, in my opinion, Elio probably looked like the best of the bunch, just from where he could put the car, again, a Ganassi affiliated car with MSR. But, the four-timer's going for 5. It'd be kind of interesting if it's like a 2021 scenario all over again where you got Palou chasing Elio. Like, I start to think about those things, right? We start to think about the lore of it. And, Joseph going for 3 in a row and Takuma going for his 3rd, which could easily be his 4th at this point. So, yeah, just right out of the gate, that's kind of what takes me back through that is the engine programs, and there's a lot of guys that got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, you mentioned Andretti. That was one team I wanted to touch on. They've been a team that's kind of been out of the limelight once we've gotten to May the last couple of years. Mark, it seems like ever since Marco Andretti put his car on pole in that very weird month of May that we had in August in 2020, hardly have ever talked about him over the 4 years that followed after that. He was up there in bits and pieces. Kyle Kirkwood, as you mentioned, looked incredibly strong. Colton Herta, too. I definitely get the feeling that you're starting to see the work that this team has put in the last couple of years coming to fruition. We saw it at the end of last year on an oval, again, not a super speedway like IMS is, but Kyle Kirkwood finishes the year with that pole at Nashville Super Speedway. Colton Herta wins the race. We weren't seeing things like that a couple of years ago. I think to Alexander Rossi, who is now obviously a couple of teams removed from what at that time was Andretti Autosport. I think he last drove for them in 2022. But I remember hearing quotes from him whenever we would get to some of the short ovals on the program. That at that time it was pretty much just Iowa. That team just dreaded going to that track ever since the adoption of the air screen. That had really thrown them for a loop on some of these ovals, and I feel like we're starting to see that team claw their way back. And Kyle even said, he was in the press conference that we had at the end of the day on Thursday. I mean, a lot of guys, want to talk up and feel confident about where they are. But he said, I think we're one of the top 3 or 4 cars out there at the moment, and at least from his experience and who he ran with in packs and what he felt like his car could do. And I felt like that was apparent out there. So I think for the first year, at least as we get into May, I have some confidence that we could see some things from an Andretti car that I don't feel like I entered the month of May with the last couple.
Yeah. So a couple of things to touch on with that is Colton was running P3 last year and crashed out of P3 going into turn 1. And then
right. I forgot about that. That's right.
And then I think back to Kirkwood. I mean, he was chasing down. He was right in the thick of the fight with Joseph and Felix, chasing them down when a couple of years ago when Joseph's move kind of created that weird arrow wash scenario where Felix lost a nose, spun, and next thing we know, a tire is going over the fence and Kirkwood is upside down. And I mean, at the time, I think he was running 4th. I might have that wrong. It might have been
right around there.
But there's, to your point, they're getting to a point where they're starting to find it. They're starting to finish it. They're starting to close. And, I mean, obviously, we'll find out what's going to happen with Colton Herta in the Cadillac program at some point in the near future. But talking about Kirkwood for a second, I don't know if it's just momentum from Long Beach or what, but there's something, and people hate this because it's just me going with my eyes and my gut, but I've known Kyle for a long time. I covered him through the whole Road to Indy ladder system. You look at him and his makeup quite well, and there's something there that feels like he's starting to find the sweet spot of who he is as an IndyCar driver. Like, you feel like you're starting to see Kirkwood transition into like that guy that's potentially going to become a main player, become a lead, become a problem for a lot of people. And it's interesting because, we talk about Palou, we talk about the fact that Kirkwood held him off, we talk about Pato. There's a lot of guys that could be in this, and we've been talking about it for a long time on these last few shows of who's gonna make that effort to go after Palou. If Kirkwood can find the sweet spot, he might be your charger this year. And I look at just the way he's carrying himself, he did the interview yesterday with Georgia Henneberry and towards the end of practice, and he's chill. Well, what changes are you going to make to the car before you go out? None. We're out of tires. Like, we're just going to go out there again and run some laps. Like, just nonchalant. Just I don't know. He's carrying himself with a guy that has a lot of confidence and looks like he's really primed to take that next step. So anyway, there's a small takeaway, I guess, from where I'm seeing things, how everything's kind of laying out. But not to get too bogged down with day one. We just talked a little bit about day two. We turned up the boost on day two, and it was fast, right? Like, I mean, we had Scott McLaughlin hitting a 232.686, and certainly that was with the car that he won pole with last year. And you expect a lot from there, but there was also, and maybe this is where, I mean, qualifying is going to be king, right? Because this package, it's incredibly tough to pass, although we don't know completely how difficult it's going to be to pass because of the hybrid and what's going to take place once we get back here. But you had McLaughlin, Takuma Sato, Will Power, Rosenquist, Pelot, Dixon, Kirkwood, Herta, Newgarden, Kiffin Simpson. That was your top 10. And then you had a rookie in Louis Foster there in 11. So that was impressive by the rookie on day two. And so it was a little bit more of a mixed bag, but it was strictly Penske if you were part of the Chevy bunch, really. And then trouble struck, right? Then we've got the boost turned up. We're running some laps. We're doing some things. Some guys are catching toes. Some guys aren't. Kyle Larson kind of just, I don't know how to say, it looked like he went in a little bit too high, grazed the wall, and then just ended up eating it in turn two. And then not even too long after that, Takuma Sato with a massive shunt. I mean, just colossal hit, getting out of the car. You could tell he's sore. You could tell he's banged up. Thankfully, he's okay. And, that kind of tempered a lot of things with the boost for the rest of the day, or for the rest of that session, because in the afternoon we turned the boost back down, business as usual. That was chaos in its own right. But I want to get your take on this. How do we feel about the boost for a test? First time at a test that we had the boost turned up. Massive hit for Sato. What we saw with the hit with Larson put him behind the wall for the rest of the day. He didn't come back. So fans that were in attendance, hopefully to see Larson for the rest of the day, they didn't get that. He was out within the first hour of testing. So, but some pace with the Chevys still with McLaughlin clearly. So there's still a threat, at least on pole day, that we know of based on what we've seen. Honda obviously still doing their thing. And, but what do we make of the boost? What do we make of the times? How do we feel about the boost in the morning session of the test?
As someone, here, I'll put this in two camps. I feel like as a fan, or someone who enjoys the kind of the pacing around the month of May, I feel like running the boost at this April open test session took a little bit of the intrigue or the excitement or the unknowns out of that Fast Friday session that we see, where it's 6 hours of guys trying to hop out whenever there's clear track and trying to either throw down a good lap or see what they have in a 4-lap session. Although at the same time, I don't think we've really truly seen the speed that these cars have. A lot of drivers said after both days, no one's really showing their card yet. No one's pushing too terribly, close to the limit. Whether you're a driver that's just keeping your foot in it no matter what, that you might do on qualifying that you wouldn't do on 3 weeks or whatever it is before we get to Fast Friday and qualifying. I just actually pulled up the timing and scoring sheet from Fast Friday last year. Our top times, let's see, we had 5 times in the 234s, and our top was 232. You said 232.6,
232.6.
tied 232.6 at least. So I don't know yet, and I don't know that drivers and teams quite know yet if we're going to get to the speeds that we had last year. So I guess, as I kind of talk myself through that a little bit, knowing that we haven't seen everything that we're going to see once we get to Fast Friday next month, there's still a lot of unknowns, but there's a little bit of that, like, oh my gosh, I wonder what we're going to see on Fast Friday. What speeds are we going to see? Who's going to be strong? Who's not going to be? I feel like we know maybe a little bit of that, although admittedly, we only had a 2.5-hour session to begin with. And as you mentioned, Kyle Larson hit the wall kind of like right about the halfway point, and right as they got his crash cleaned up. I mean, I was at the medical center and wasn't watching the broadcast or watching the timing and scoring screen, but it felt like within 5 minutes of Kyle getting cleaned up, his car getting cleaned up. At least Kyle got out of the car under his own power and left the care center totally fine. It seemed like 5 minutes after cars started running again, if not less time. Takuma Sato was there in the wall again in turn one in the South Chute. So it felt like things were really sped up, and I don't know how much time guys really truly got to spend in completely clean track, no tow situations. And I also don't know how much time guys got to really get like a that great tow or actual tow lap where we see some of those speeds on Fast Friday get a lot higher than what guys would actually be doing if they didn't have a little bit of a draft from someone. So I guess where I come out from this is I hope now that they've done the learning that they need to do with the hybrid, I hope that we go back to having no boost at the open test. Although sometimes I wonder, once we add something like this and the manufacturers get to do some learning and the teams do some learning ahead of time, it's sometimes kind of tough to claw things back from folks, because there are some positives from this. Teams, Graham Rahal was talking about this during our bullpen session on Wednesday, after the veterans had been out for a little bit, certainly a day before we got the boost turned up. He said from a team like RLL, you want to do as much learning as early in this Indy 500 preparation process as you can, because if you have any concerns about being a little bit behind on things or not knowing exactly which direction you need to go or what the effects of the hybrid is going to be or how to use it during qualifying, this is a great situation for a team like that, where they're kind of starting with a little bit of a clean slate, and the new engineers and the new technical direction and a new team president that they have in Jay Fry. I'm sure a team like RLL is really happy that we had this on Thursday and didn't just rock up to Fast Friday and turn the boost up with the hybrid for the first time. And all of a sudden, even though teams are obviously doing some simulation work and trying to envision in their heads how things are going to work out, you never really know until you get on track and you see the effect the balance shift has, and exactly the best way to go about using your 60 horsepower that the teams have through that 4-lap qualifying session. So I think ultimately it was a positive thing for the series and the manufacturers and the teams to do. I think there was a lot of learning that came out of it because of it. Well, maybe not a lot. I think there were some learnings that came from it. Ultimately, when it was kind of condensed as much as it was, hard to maybe kind of say, maybe hard to make some grand pronouncements out of it. But I do hope secretly that they shift things back to the way they were once we get to next year, and we still have that big anticipation once we get to Fast Friday and not totally knowing where everyone stands. How did you feel about that, both from a reporter, a member of the paddock, and also kind of a fan at the same time?
So at first, yesterday, especially after the Takuma wreck, I was just like, why in the hell are we running the boost first thing in the morning? I kind of wish we flipped the sessions. I wish we had race trim in the morning and we closed with mostly because you think back to how qualifying works. Typically, qualifying is going to happen sometimes like for the Fast 12 or Fast 9, whatever we're calling it this year, and it's like, and in the last row shootout, of course, but you look at this and most of that's run whenever it's hot, slick afternoon. Like I kind of wish we were seeing similar conditions for that,
Sure.
but and yesterday I was really struggling with how to feel about it. But honestly, you made a couple of good points, and I think one was I didn't necessarily take into consideration at first until you mentioned it that this, even though I mean it's important to run this with the hybrid. It's important to have this in preparation with the hybrid, and I think even further to that. I think back to was it October last year. Every team had like one driver that went out there and did things, and I feel like this was a chance to kind of even it up and let everybody have a touch and a feel to what the hybrid's going to do, and when you're turning the boost up, what the sensation's going to feel, what the weight's going to feel like. Because I mean, even I think that was I can't remember who was saying it. It may have been Kirkwood also yesterday, but talking about he had a blister on his hand and just talking about like the weight that he can feel, the sensations a little bit different for him. And so it's like that for everybody, I'm sure. But, you look at that with the exception of, and this is, he'll remain anonymous, but because I feel like he might wish to remain anonymous, but he had told me, a member of the paddock had told me that Takuma Sato was running a -2 wing when everybody else is at +2 before Sato crashed. One, that would explain the ridiculous apex turn one apex speed that he had before the crash, but no one was really going for it. Everyone was trying to feel it out, with the exception of Sato, and it kind of makes you wonder. But everybody's trying to just get a feel for it. But look, at the end of the day, these are big kids. They're professionals. They can dictate their own thing. If IndyCar wants to have a boost session, if you want to run. If you don't, you don't. It's as simple as that. I mean, Larson only ran one lap.
And that was like, I mean, for all intents and purposes, like a warm up lap. He was starting what would have been his first lap in a 4-lap run, qualifying simulation run. Crossed the yard of bricks, took the green flag, and 5-6 seconds later was in the wall.
Yeah, but we've got, I'm counting it here, outside of Larson, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other drivers run single digit laps for the racing. That's including Sato, who had 8 total laps on it. So that's kind of my takeaway. I think it's good for every driver to get a little bit of a feel, so their first feel isn't on Fast Friday, especially some of these rookies. And it's important for the teams, it's important for the manufacturers. So I'll leave that there. On the boost thing, we went over the results, went over all that. I'm kind of curious. The afternoon was wonky. When we turn the boost back down, we get race trim running. And once again, it's Ganassi cars at the front, right? It's Honda at the front again. It's Palou, it's Rosenquist, it's Kirkwood. Connor Daly, shout out to him, sneaking up there and getting P4 for Juncos Hollinger Racing. And then Joseph rounding out the top 5. So there was some chaos moment. There's some chaos in terms of close moments in that afternoon session. Rinus VK ran out of fuel at one point, and there was a little bit of a traffic jam that could have been incredibly bad for probably 6 to 8 different cars right there, I'd say.
6 cars, I think, yeah.
And then later on, Jacob Abel, same team, Dale Coyne Racing, also ran out of fuel. And so it's interesting because, one, I don't know why people are running out of fuel in a test session. I mean, you're not running quali sim in race trim, but so that's a story for another day. Maybe they just wanted to try into fuel last gap run if we're getting close to the end of the race or something and they think they're in it. But Alex Palou to me looked incredibly strong. I touched on it at the beginning of this show, is just the way that the Ganassi cars could follow him in particular. Felix looked good. Kirkwood looked good. Connor really jumps up. I got to be honest, the progression they made from day one to day two, and running their plan, whatever that plan was, obviously I have no idea, but they look stout, and we don't talk about this. I don't know. Obviously, we haven't talked about it at all, but I don't think it gets talked about enough. That love them, hate them. Augustin Canapino last year was in the thick of running for an Indy 500 top five. He was running, I think, P6 before he sped on pit lane on the very last pit stop. So that team knows how
he was in the running for a Fast 12 appearance before he had his plenum event too.
Before the plenum event, yeah. So this team, even though they have no affiliation with anybody, no technical alliances, no anything, they know how to find the speed. They know how to extract it. They know how to just play the strategy game and work their way up. And Connor, we all know Connor is a player when it comes to the speedway. So, shout out to him for a P4 run. I think they're scratching the surface, and who knows, maybe they're, I don't want to say dark horse, because I don't think he's a dark horse. I think he's an obvious pick, but he could be in the. He very much is going to be in the mix, and this certainly shows that. So that's kind of my takeaway of what we got on the race trim for the second half of day two.
Felt like it was really notable, especially day two, but really, when you look at the timing sheets on day one, it felt like things evened out a little bit more after we got through the day in terms of the Honda and Chevy battle. But it seemed like it really stood out to me, really with Connor as an outlier in that last 3-hour session that we had on Thursday. It seemed like the Chevys that we did have toward the top, they were all Penske's. Joseph, Scott, Joseph was near the top on day one. Scott topped that high boost session. Will Power, I think, was up, at or around or near the top 10 in just about every session that we had. Joseph led the Team Penske pack on that final 3-hour session that we had on Thursday. It seemed notable to me that it felt kind of like a Honda versus Team Penske battle, whereas that didn't totally seem like it was the case the last 2 years when Chevy was really strong. Ultimately, Joseph and Team Penske have had something else, another gear, what have you, these last couple of years, when you had a Chevy versus Chevy battle on those last couple laps between Joseph and Pato. Pato has said it before. The way Joseph sucked right back up to Pato on the backstretch of lap 200 last year, just as Pato had made a pass the straightaway prior. Guys have said afterwards, like, you're not really, if you pass someone on a lap, it usually takes about one lap for you to, resettle, refire, and
get
suck
spooled
back
up.
Get spooled up and suck back up to someone and make a pass stick. And the fact that Joseph was able to do that within a half a lap or less after that was really notable. We didn't see or hear a whole lot from the Air McLaren crew. We didn't see a whole lot from the Foyt team or from ECR. Again, I don't want to make too grand of pronouncements yet. And I really do think before we, make some, before I make my, pick on who I think is going to win, I need to get a better feel of where Honda, where Chevy are, if these groups are truly even for the most part this year, or if any one of them has any sort of an advantage. And certainly from a qualifying standpoint, we won't have much of a feel for that, I don't think, until Fast Friday. And even then, folks hold some stuff back. Folks aren't trimming out the exact same way that they would in the Fast Six throughout Fast Friday. But I have gotten the early sense that it seems like this is an early, kind of Penske versus Ganassi cars, meaning Ganassi and Meyer-Shank Racing. I think maybe the Andretti cars are just a touch behind that group, and I would probably say Pato is probably right around there. If I made a list of, here are the guys that if you tell me on the evening of May 25th, if this list of guys won, I wouldn't be surprised coming out of this test. I think I kind of did a mental list, and I think it's about 9 guys. I think it is Scott Dixon and Alex Palou. I think it's the 3 Penske drivers, so you got 5 right there. I think it's Elio. That's 6, Pato 7, Colton Herta and Kyle Kirkwood 8 and 9, and then maybe you could throw Felix Rosenquist to make it around number 10. That's kind of where I feel right now. I probably last year would have said Santino Ferrucci in there too, and I do think on one thing on Santino, he did tell us at the bullpen on Wednesday that AJ Foyt Racing's approach to this 2-day open test was they were going to try a radically different setup ideology and see if it was something that Santino was comfortable with. And if it wasn't, if he left this open test, relatively unsatisfied, they would throw it away, never think about it again, and just go back to some theories and some feelings and some setups that he was running last year. So I don't know that I want to make too much out of where Santino was over these couple of days, which was either toward the back. Certainly he wasn't dead last. He had his engine failure, so he didn't do a whole lot of running on Wednesday, but he was one of those guys that was kind of lost in the middle of things once we got to Thursday, and not someone up near the top that we were talking about a lot more. So maybe he ends up in that group. Interested to hear, if you are thinking of that same line of thinking of guys that I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if they won on May 25th, just coming out of this test. Does that list for you look any different?
I mean, I think the players are going to be the same players, the same players for a reason, right? It's because typically they're the ones that are more polished, buttoned up. I don't totally disagree with your list. I do think that Connor is gonna be a player. I do think for sure. I don't think you can discount Marcus Ericsson. I know we touched on Kirkwood and whatnot, and you said the Andretti cars being a smidge off. I don't know how to say this without sounding like I don't know what I learned about Christian Lundgaard out of this test. And it frustrates me because he was one of the guys I was really curious about. I was really curious to see
Aaron McLaren as a whole. I mean, outside of Kyle Larson crashing on Thursday morning was the only time that I really thought too much about Aaron McLaren. I talked to Pato at the very end of the day on Thursday, and I think he finished with the 8th fastest time in that end of the day session on Thursday afternoon. And he said he felt like he was, comfortable, happy with his car. There's more work to do, but he didn't sound worried or anxious or concerned. Again, I don't think if you're a driver like him who's a veteran and on a team that's historically been good at this track, I don't think even if he'd finished worse than that, I don't think you should be jumping to those conclusions yet. But it did seem like it was notable that Aaron McLaren felt like they were kind of lost in things. And again, we don't know what teams are working on, if they're testing out things that they're maybe not expecting to work or to be very good, so they can, mark things off and eliminate things from their thought process or their list of possibilities. As we're starting to look towards May, some folks are not really looking to set a fast time. They're not looking to get a big toe and throw a big lap up there. I think of Ed Carpenter, for example, is someone that was toward the bottom of the timesheets fairly consistently through these couple of days. And Ed, though he's had a rough couple years, I wouldn't expect him to not be among the folks that we're talking about and thinking about once we get into the month of May. But I would agree, as after we've seen so much of Christian over these first couple races of the year, knowing that Pato has been historically strong in the last 3 or 4 years here with Aaron McLaren, Christian in particular, but that team kind of as a whole wasn't quite up toward the top, especially once we got to the end of Thursday, as maybe some of those other teams that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I even though he crashed, which sounds really weird to set it up that way, but I will never ever rule out Takuma Sato. It doesn't matter what he's driving. He could literally be in a cart where horses are towing him around the track, and I will still give that dude a chance. So I think they're going to be fine. There is something to be said for the fact that like his just aggressive, just real brazen style is just it clicks here. It works. I mean, and he ate the fence well, and he hit hard. But you know what? He ate the fence in 2012 and came back and won it 5 years later, and then 3 years after that. So I will never rule him out, and I'm curious if that'll filter over the rest of RLL and we get a pure shape. But I want to go another direction with you before we set up here to finish it off. Is I'd be remiss. We have 2 days of testing. We saw boost up, we saw boost down. We've seen everybody run. I think before we get too crazy and talking about winners and who we think is going to win and who we think can sit on pole for this race, because we're going to have plenty of time to talk about that during the month of May. But who do you think is in trouble the most? From making the show? Like, who do you look at and think, I don't know if they're going to make if they're going to be cut from the field of 33.
Yeah, I mean it's unfortunate. We had this last year. And I think if memory serves me right, also in 2023 was Graham the only car that got bumped in 23. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah.
So we've had this situation the last couple of years. I would always rather we have 35 instead of 34, so it's not just one person getting sent home. I mean, frankly, 36 would be awesome. So you just have more wiggle room. You've got more teams involved.
I want 40. I want 40, man. Like
that would be awesome. But let's get that third engine manufacturer on the phone and signed, sealed, and delivered before we even think of that fantasy. But yeah, when I think about my kind of early watch list, as you would say, I think it's notable that Prema wasn't, consistently near the bottom, or I mean, consistently at the bottom. Their cars did not really show out. They were pretty consistently among the 6 or 7 slowest cars that you saw, and that's kind of where, as I look over these timing sheets, I don't want to make too much out of any one practice, even whether it's the qualifying one or not. Obviously, when the boost is turned up, things, balance gets shifted a little bit. You ultimately figure out just how much top end speed you have, and you get drivers, especially rookies or young drivers, figure out where their comfort level lies and just how on the edge they can take it and how much their team can push them from a setup standpoint. I didn't see anything from them that would lead me to believe that they won't in some way be part of the conversation, and it's really just natural. I mean, this is a team that has never run an oval race in their lives. They are a championship caliber organization from Italy. They have lit up the record books in the junior, all sorts of junior Formula Series across Europe, and I give them a lot of credit in what they've done so far, embarking on a 2-car full-time campaign to kick off their IndyCar story, their IndyCar chapter. But I feel like Callum Ilott and Robert Schwartzman, even if they're, say, not in the last chance qualifying group, once we get to Sunday of qualifying, I'd be really impressed if those guys are qualifying higher than, say, like 25th, for example. And really, once you get in, I'd say once you get to qualifying weekend, there's probably a group of 7 or 8 guys, and sometimes it comes down to luck or not crashing or not having a mechanical issue or things like that figure out ultimately who ends up in that last chance qualifier group. So I would put them in that group of 6 or 7 that I'm keeping an eye on. I would keep an eye on Jacob Abel from Dale Coyne Racing. They weren't overly quick. I think there was maybe one session that Jacob was up in the low 20s in, but otherwise was near the bottom most of the time that we had on track. And I mean, just little things like running out of fuel for both their cars. Like some things like that you just have to wonder what else is going to fall through the cracks. Again, has nothing to do with the team's speed, the driver's capability, but those are some things that kind of stand out a little bit. I look at Jack Harvey just as a driver who, yes, he is very experienced, but is on a team that's never run with hybrid before, never raced with it. And when you've got such a big technological change in a team that's, employing folks, I think, as far as I understand it, full time, but is just not racing. When you lose a full day or nearly a full day of testing like Jack did by having his hybrid failure and seeing where he finished in some of the sessions that we had, that's someone I'm keeping an eye on. Jacob Abel, I think I already mentioned him as a rookie with Coin, and then Graham Rahal showed pretty strong, but his teammates, Devlin DeFrancesco, who again only ran a couple years with Andretti, and Louis Foster as a rookie. Louis had some decent moments, but that team as a whole, until really we get through this month of May, knowing where they have been the last couple years, once we got to qualifying, including a year where 3 of their 4 cars were on the bubble, and last year where Graham was on the bubble and only barely made the race. It seems like maybe Graham's car is sorted a little bit, but Devlin and Louis were down there somewhat frequently. So those are, let's see, those are my 6 guys that I'm keeping an eye on initially. Is there anyone else that you would toss into that mix?
I mean, it's a good list. I'll say that. I mean, I'm just kind of looking over a few things here, and yeah, I'm a little concerned about David Malukas, if I'm being honest. And again, I'm sure once we get to the month of May, he's going to be a rocket ship, and he's going to run in the top 12, top 18, and qualify right there in the top 20. But just based on the feedback of the last 2 days, like you said, we didn't see much out of Foyt. Short of the most. I wouldn't call it TV time. I guess I'd call it YouTube time.
Stream time. Yeah.
Stream time. The most stream time that they really got was when Santino's engine failure happened. So, but I mean, I'm sitting here looking at the boosted list, and they were 26th on the board, and they weren't that impressive speed wise in any of the other sessions. So, kind of looking at them, I think not the fun part in terms of, yeah, this is great, but just fun as in the mystery, the intrigue is, we're going to get one surprise, right?
Yep.
Like there's going to be one person that either bobbles in qualifying on day one or walls it. And
I mean, Marcus Ericsson is the perfect example of that last year.
Yeah.
Crashes in whatever practice day that was, and they've got to go to a new car, and I think new car, if not, had to do some drastic repairs on the one that he did crash, and he's fighting to make his way into the race. Seems like we always have someone like that. You would say probably the year before that it was Graham Rahal. We later learned that was a team-wide thing that ran much deeper. But Will Power in 2021, I think in 2022 we didn't have any bumping, so no one was really on that bubble. But you're right. There's always going to be someone that's going to catch us by surprise that we're not talking about right now.
I think the other one, and this is just briefly, I guess, Nolan Siegel, right? I mean, he was a rocket ship last year in terms of just he was going to go for it, and he was a rocket ship through 1 and 2, no trim. He's got that great quote that I love, and I'm sure everybody else loves, that is leaving my mind right now. But he wasn't going to lift, but you look at this, and there's no excuse right now. He's in an Arrow McLaren car. They've notoriously been good at the Speedway, and I mean he's 33rd right now on the boosted leaderboard, but he only ran 6 laps in total. So it's a small sample size, but you'd hope that he would not be in the conversation, because that'd be demoralizing to do that 2 years in a row for your first 2 attempts. So, but like I said, we hate it for anyone that's going to miss the race, but the list is the list, and I'd say that's probably what I'm looking at.
All right. that should wrap things up for us. We will have another episode coming up here. I mean, gosh, what, in a little bit more than a week? Cars will be on track at Barber Motorsports Park next Friday. So we're taping this on Friday midday, the day after testing. Hopefully you're listening to this not long after. So we'll have our next episode recapping IndyCar action at Barber Motorsports Park. At that point, it will be early in the month of May, and then we'll continue to have race recap episodes throughout the season, and we'll have probably an extra episode or two really diving deep into the month of May. We're still working on figuring out exactly what that schedule is going to look like, but excited to dive a little bit deeper on this podcast platform in a way that I think Joey maybe haven't quite been able to do this last couple of years, and this is a really fun exercise and way just to kind of flesh things out and see where a couple guys that are following this sport closely, what we're looking at, what we're thinking and feeling, and Joey and I both do a heck of a lot of writing during the month of May, but this audio platform and ability to kind of riff back and forth is always a great time, and month of May is a great time to do that. So I'm sure we'll have 4, 5, or 6 episodes here for you guys shortly in the month of May. If you guys have any thoughts, suggestions, concerns, questions, feel free to reach out to us on what you'd like to see more from this podcast platform. I am actually doing, I don't think this has been formally announced yet, but I don't think I will be getting anyone in trouble. I'll be doing a Reddit AMA, Ask Me Anything, to kick off the month of May on May 1st on the IndyCar Reddit page. So if you are someone who frequents that platform, put that on your calendar. Looking forward to diving into that group to answer some questions there. And then we'll be talking about Barber Motorsports Park here a couple days after that, and looking towards the GP very briefly, and then cars getting on track for more Indy 500 action for real mid-May. So thanks again, Joey, for joining me. Rest up, because it's going to be a busy couple weeks here once we get into rolling into the month of May.
Peace.